The wine glass stood alone in its vault, dust-free and untouchable, a single crimson mark pressed against crystal like a sealed promise the vampire king refused to let fade. Ravian Kaltherion had lived 632 years, ruled the Scarlet Throne for 4 centuries, and never once kept a souvenir from any mortal encounter, until the night a sommelier named Willa Ashford touched her lips to his favorite Bordeaux and walked away without asking permission. He stared at it now, this glass locked behind spelled iron in his private chamber, deep beneath the modern city, and tried to remember when exactly sentiment had carved its way past every defense he'd spent lifetimes building. The lipstick mark curved perfect against the rim, very dark and personal, and he hated how much he wanted to preserve it, how much he already had. The memory pulled him back 3 weeks, to the moment his court sommelier had resigned without explanation and his chancellor Lysander had suggested bringing in a human consultant to appraise the legendary cellar no one had properly catalogued in 200 years. A human, Ravian had said flatly. The best, Lysander replied, white hair falling over his pale brow as he inclined his head with the precise deference 4 centuries of service had perfected. Willa Ashford. She authenticated the Chateau d'Yquem collection in Prague, traced the missing Domaine de la Romanée Conti reserves in Vienna. If anyone can sort what we actually have versus what legend claims, it's her. Humans are temporary, which is why she won't stay long enough to become a security concern, my lord. Lysander's smile was thin and knowing. 6 weeks. She appraises, catalogues, leaves. We pay her extraordinarily well to forget where our cellar actually is. Ravian had agreed, because the alternative was letting Cassius, his younger cousin and the court's master of coin, continue making noise about selling off bottles to fund expansion into the Asian markets. Cassius understood profit. He didn't understand that some things weren't measured in currency, that the cellar beneath the Scarlet Court held more than wine. It held memory, history, the taste of centuries. So he'd said yes to the human consultant, expecting someone efficient and forgettable. Willa Ashford arrived on the October night that smelled like rain and dying leaves, and Ravian knew immediately he'd made a miscalculation. She stood in the receiving hall of his estate, the public face of the court that rose above ground as a Gothic mansion tucked into the city's oldest quarter, and looked utterly unimpressed by the vaulted ceilings, the ancestral portraits, the carefully cultivated atmosphere of old-world power. She was maybe 26, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed in practical black trousers and a cream blouse that suggested she'd come to work, not be intimidated. Miss Ashford. Ravian descended the main staircase, aware of how the entry lights caught his white hair, his pale skin, the crimson vest he'd chosen because it matched the throne he'd left 2 levels below. Welcome, she turned, met his gaze without flinching, and extended a hand. Mr. Kaltherion, thank you for the opportunity. Her palm was warm against his cold one, her grip firm and brief. Mortal heat always startled him, the aliveness of it. You come highly recommended, he said, releasing her hand before the contact could linger. I trust your travel was uneventful? Long but fine, she glanced around the hall with the same assessing look she'd probably give a wine bottle. I've read what records your people sent. The cellar dates back to the early 1800s, correct? 1807, Ravian confirmed, though portions of the collection are older, relocated from European holdings. I'll need full access, no restrictions on bottles I can examine or rooms I can enter within the cellar itself. Her tone was polite but non-negotiable. If there are areas you want excluded from appraisal, tell me now. Ravian studied her, this small human woman making demands in his hall, and felt something like amusement flicker through his chest. Full access, he agreed. Lysander will show you to your quarters. We begin tomorrow evening. Evening? She raised an eyebrow. I work better in natural light when possible. The cellar has no windows, Miss Ashford, and I keep nocturnal hours. He let his smile show teeth, just enough to remind her she was in a house with different rules. I hope that won't be a problem. She held his gaze a beat longer, then shrugged. Your schedule. I adjust. Lysander materialized at her elbow, ever the perfect chancellor, and guided her toward the east wing where they kept mortal-appropriate rooms, ones with heating that worked and beds that didn't smell like dust and time. Ravian watched her go, noticed the straight line of her spine, the way she'd looked at him like he was just another client, not a vampire king who could drain her dry before she drew breath to scream. Interesting. The cellar itself was a cathedral to excess, vaulted stone chambers that sprawled beneath the mansion in a maze of temperature-controlled wings, each one devoted to a different region or era. Ravian led Willa down the main stairs the next evening, aware of her slight hesitation as the darkness swallowed the sounds of the world above. "Power?" she asked, eyeing the electric sconces that flickered on as they descended. "Modern wiring, old fixtures," Ravian said. "We renovated in the 60s. Before that it was all torchlight." "Terrible for the wine?" "We managed." He pushed open the iron door at the base of the stairs, and the cellar proper breathed cool air into their faces, rich with the scent of oak and earth and fermenting thyme. "After you." Willa stepped past him into the first chamber and went very still. The room stretched 40 feet in every direction, walls lined floor to ceiling with bottles cradled in custom iron racks, each one labeled in scripts that ranged from faded calligraphy to modern printed tags. A massive wooden table dominated the center, its surface worn smooth by centuries of tastings, and the lighting was soft and indirect, designed to protect the precious glass from any harshness. "Jesus," Willa breathed, then louder. "How many bottles are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate, 30,000. Ravian moved to the table, rested his fingertips against the wood. "Spread across 6 primary chambers and another dozen storage alcoves. Some cataloged, most not. That's your job." She turned slowly, taking it in, and he watched her face shift from shock to something like hunger, the look of someone who just found their life's work made tangible. "I'm going to need longer than 6 weeks, she said. "You have 8. Ravian pulled out one of the chairs, settled into it with the ease of someone who'd sat in that exact spot for 200 years. "After that, the court moves to our winter residence. You're welcome to continue there, but I suspect you'd prefer to finish here." "Winter residence?" "The Alps. Less accessible." He gestured at the nearest rack. "Shall we begin with the Burgundies? Or would you prefer to start with the vintage champagnes? Fair warning, the champagne vault hasn't been opened since 1947. Willa pulled out a leather notebook, clicked open a pen, and met his eyes with a grin that transformed her entire face from serious to radiant. "Let's start with whatever you're most afraid I'll tell you is worthless." He laughed, actually laughed, and pulled down a bottle from 1893. The work became a rhythm. Willa arrived each evening at sunset, her arms full of reference books and camera equipment, and they'd spend hours in the cool dark, going bottle by bottle through sections of the collection, while she made notes in handwriting so precise it looked like calligraphy. Ravian found himself lingering when he should have been attending to court business, answering her questions about provenance and acquisition, watching her face light up every time she identified something rare. "This is ridiculous," she said one night, cradling a bottle of 1811 Chateau d'Yquem like it was made of blown sugar. "Do you understand what you have here? This vintage, this bottle, it's basically extinct everywhere else." "I know what I have." Ravian leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "My great-uncle won it in a card game in Vienna. The man he won it from shot himself the next evening. Unrelated, supposedly." "Supposedly?" Willa set the bottle down with infinite care, logged it in her database. "You keep saying things like that. Stories attached to every bottle. Do you actually remember all of them, or are you embellishing for my benefit?" "I remember." He reached past her for a Bordeaux, let his arm brush hers, felt her sharp inhale. "I was there for most of them. The ones I wasn't, I heard firsthand from whoever was." She'd gone very still, her warmth radiating against his cold skin. "How old are you exactly?" "Exactly?" He set the Bordeaux down, didn't step back. 632 years. Give or take a decade. We didn't keep careful records during the plague. And you've been collecting wine the entire time." "Not the entire time. The first century I was mostly concerned with not being killed by vampire hunters or rival courts. The wine collecting started later when I had territory worth defending and time worth filling." He finally stepped back, gave her space to breathe. "It became a hobby, then an obsession. Now it's just what I do." Willa turned to face him fully, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why wine specifically? You don't even drink it." I do drink it. You know what I mean. You don't need it. It doesn't sustain you. She gestured at the racks surrounding them. So why? Ravian was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth to offer this human woman who'd somehow become more than a consultant in the 3 weeks since she'd arrived. Because it changes, he said finally. Because every bottle is alive in a way I'm not. It ages, evolves, becomes something different year by year. I can keep it, preserve it, but I can't stop it from transforming. That's mortal magic. The kind I don't possess. She stared at him, and he wondered if he'd said too much, revealed too much of the emptiness that came with endless time. Then she smiled, soft and sad and understanding. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard about wine. Don't tell the other collectors. They'll think I've gone soft. Your secret's safe. She pulled out her phone, checked the time, swore quietly. It's 3 a.m. I should sleep. Should you? Ravian moved toward the door, held it open. Or shall we open the champagne vault? You've been staring at it all week. Her exhaustion visibly warred with temptation. Temptation won. 1 hour, she said. Then I'm sleeping for the entire day. The champagne vault was smaller, more intimate, the bottles racked horizontally in temperature-controlled silence. Ravian unsealed the door with a key he wore on a chain around his neck, and Willa slipped past him into the cool darkness, her breath misting slightly. Oh, she whispered. The racks glittered with foil and age-darkened labels, bottles from houses that had survived wars and revolutions and changing tastes. Ravian watched Willa move among them like she'd entered a church, her fingers hovering over glass without quite touching. May I? She glanced back at him, indicating a bottle from 1928. You may. He pulled it down himself, carried it to the small tasting table tucked in the vault's corner. Shall we open it? Are you insane? This is museum-worthy. It's wine-worthy. Ravian produced a corkscrew from the table's drawer, began working the cork free with practiced care. Wine is meant to be drunk, Miss Ashford, even the legendary bottles, especially those. The cork came free with a soft sigh, and he poured a careful measure into 2 crystal glasses that had sat in that drawer since the vault was sealed. The wine glowed pale gold in the low light, and Willa accepted her glass like he'd handed her something holy. To mortal magic, Ravian said, raising his own glass. To obsessive collectors who actually open their bottles, Willa countered. They drank. The champagne was ethereal, barely there, a whisper of honey and time. Willa closed her eyes, and Ravian watched her face, the concentration, the joy. When she opened her eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears. That's perfect, she said quietly. That's absolutely perfect. Oh, yes, Ravian agreed, but he wasn't looking at his glass. She set her champagne down, and he saw the mark her lips had left against the crystal, a berry dark imprint of lipstick he hadn't noticed her applying. The sight of it did something strange to his chest, made him aware of how close they were standing, how warm she felt in the cool vault, how badly he wanted to close the distance and find out if she tasted like champagne in mortality. Instead, he stepped back, put the table between them. You should sleep, he said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. I'll lock up. Willa studied him with those 2 knowing eyes, then nodded. Tomorrow evening? Tomorrow evening. She left, and Ravian stood alone in the champagne vault, staring at the glass she'd abandoned on the table, the lipstick mark like a signature. He should wash it. Put it away. Forget the way she'd looked at him before he'd retreated. Instead, he picked it up, turned it slowly in his fingers, and felt the weight of wanting something he couldn't keep. The glass went into his private chamber that night, locked behind spelled iron where no one else would see it, and Ravian told himself it meant nothing at all. He was still telling himself that lie 2 nights later when Willa walked into the cellar wearing a dark red dress instead of her usual work clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, and smiled at him like she knew exactly what that glass meant and was daring him to admit it. Special occasion? He managed. I finished the Burgundy inventory. She set her bag down, pulled out her laptop. 2,347 bottles, 12 of which are so rare I can't even find auction comparisons. You're sitting on about $40 million worth of French wine in that one section alone. Is that all? Ravian moved closer, drawn despite himself. I expected higher. That's a conservative estimate. If you actually sold some of these at auction, collectors would lose their minds. The market value would spike. She turned the laptop so he could see her spreadsheets, her catalogs, the meticulous work she'd done. But you're not going to sell them, are you? No, because they're changing, becoming. She closed the laptop, looked up at him. Because that's mortal magic. You were listening. I'm always listening. She stood and the dress moved around her like wine pouring, dark and rich. Ravian, why did you keep the glass? His name in her mouth undid something. What glass? The one from the champagne vault, the one I drank from. I came back the next evening to wash it, and it was gone. She stepped closer and he could smell her perfume now, something warm and spiced. You kept it. Why? He could lie, should lie. Instead, he said, because you left your mark on it. And that matters to you? Yes? The admission cost him, felt like showing his throat. It shouldn't, but it does. Willa reached up, her warm fingers brushing his cold cheek, and he went utterly still. What if I want it to matter? You don't know what you're saying. I'm 26 years old. I've appraised wine collections for oligarchs and crime lords and actual literal dictators, and I chose to come here knowing exactly what you are. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. Don't insult me by pretending I'm naive. I could hurt you, Ravian said, but he didn't pull away. You won't. She said it with such certainty, such trust, and he wanted to believe her. You've spent 3 weeks showing me your collection like it's your soul laid bare, telling me stories, sharing bottles that should never be opened. You kept a glass because I touched it. You're not going to hurt me, Ravian. You're terrified you're going to care about me. I already care about you. The words escaped before he could stop them. That's the problem. She kissed him. It was soft and careful, her warm mouth against his cold one, and for a heartbeat, Ravian froze, caught between instinct and desire. Then he kissed her back, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer, and she made a small sound of triumph that vibrated through him like music. She tasted like wine and lipstick and aliveness, and he wanted to drown in it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willa smiled up at him with swollen lips and said, I'm falling for you, just so you know. You shouldn't. Too late, she kissed him again, briefer this time. Now show me the Bordeaux vault you've been avoiding. I know there's another section you haven't let me see. He showed her everything, the hidden racks and secret alcoves, the bottles he'd kept from even Lysander's meticulous records. They worked until dawn painted the sky above ground, and when Willa finally left for her room, Ravian returned to his chamber and stood before the locked vault, staring at the wine glass with its perfect lipstick mark, and knew he was already lost. The court noticed, of course. Lysander mentioned it delicately 3 days later, appearing in Ravian's study with the careful neutrality he wore when delivering unwelcome news. My lord, there's been talk. Ravian didn't look up from the territorial reports he was reviewing. There's always talk. About the human consultant, about how much time you're spending with her. Lysander settled into the chair across the desk, his pale hands folded precisely in his lap. Cassius is asking questions. Cassius can ask whatever he likes. He's suggesting to the council that your judgment has become compromised, that your attachment to the mortal is making you soft, vulnerable. Lysander's tone remained perfectly neutral. He's calling for her contract to be terminated early. Now Ravian did look up, and his expression made Lysander go very still. Is he? He frames it as concern for your reputation, my lord. For the court's strength. A pause. He's not wrong that others are watching, wondering. You've ruled for 400 years without showing preference for any individual, mortal or vampire. This woman has been here 4 weeks, and you've rearranged your entire schedule around her. I'm ensuring the cellar appraisal is thorough. You're falling in love with her. Lysander said it quietly, without judgment. And the court sees it. Some are pleased, many are uncertain. A few see opportunity in your distraction. Ravian set down the reports, met his chancellor's ancient eyes. What do you see? I see a king who's been lonely for centuries, finally finding something that makes him feel alive. Lysander's smile was small and sad. I also see danger, my lord. Cassius isn't wrong that sentiment can be exploited. If you care for this woman, there are those who will use her against you. Let them try. They will. Lysander stood, precise as always. I wanted you to be prepared. He left, and Ravian sat alone in his study, thinking about Willa's laugh in the cellar, the way she argued with him about proper storage temperatures, the warmth of her hand in his. Thinking about the wine glass locked in his chamber, the physical proof that he'd started keeping pieces of her before he'd even admitted what she meant. Lysander was right. Sentiment was dangerous. But Ravian had faced down invasions and inquisitions and 5 separate attempts on his throne, and he'd be damned if he let fear dictate what he could and couldn't keep. That evening, he found Willa in the cellar's Bordeaux section, balanced precariously on a ladder while she examined bottles on the highest rack. She'd piled her hair on top of her head, and she was humming something off-key while she worked. That's a good way to break your neck, Ravian observed from below. She glanced down, grinned. Then catch me if I fall. Always. He steadied the ladder with one hand. Find anything interesting? 3 bottles of 1945 Mouton Rothschild, 2 of which still have the original Philip Julian labels. Do you know what those are worth? She climbed down, flushed with excitement. No, actually, do you know what they'll be worth in another 50 years if you keep them in these perfect conditions? Tell me. She did, talking with her hands, her whole body animated with enthusiasm, and Ravian watched her glow in the cellar's soft light and thought, I would burn this entire collection to keep her safe. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like truth. Have dinner with me, he said, interrupting her explanation of market appreciation. Willa blinked. We have dinner together every evening. Above ground, in the mansion proper, not working. He reached out, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Let me court you properly, Willa. Her smile could have lit the cellar. Is that what this is? Courting? If you'll allow it. I'll allow it on one condition. She caught his hand, pressed it against her cheek. Stop hiding what I mean to you. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I know about the glass. I know you're feeling something real, and I need you to stop treating it like a weakness. The court, I don't care about the court, she said fiercely. I care about you, the man who keeps wine because it reminds him that beautiful things can change and grow. The king who's so afraid of losing what he loves that he locks it away instead of letting himself live. She stepped closer, her warmth seeping into him. I'm not a wine glass, Ravian. I'm not fragile, and I'm not going to break just because you care about me. No, he agreed quietly, but others might try to break you to get to me. Then we make sure they fail. She said it with such simple confidence, such faith in him. Together. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and felt something shift in his chest, some ancient lock finally opening. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, I'm terrified of this. Good, Willa whispered back. So am I. Let's be terrified together. Dinner was a revelation. Ravian had the mansion's kitchen prepare a full meal, mortal food he barely remembered the taste of, and they ate in the formal dining room with its cathedral ceilings and ancestral portraits watching from the walls. Willa wore the red dress again, and Ravian found he couldn't stop looking at her, this vibrant living thing that had somehow carved space for herself in his careful existence. Tell me about your family, he said over dessert. Not much to tell. Middle-class parents, 1 younger brother, suburban upbringing in Connecticut. Willa traced patterns and spilled sugar on the tablecloth. They think I appraise wine for museums. I didn't mention the part where most of my clients are technically supernatural beings or criminals, sometimes both. Wise? Your turn. Any family still alive? Cassius, my cousin. He handles financial operations for the court. Ravian swirled wine in his glass, watching it catch the light. We were turned within a decade of each other, back in the 1390s. He's the closest thing to blood family I have left. But you don't like him. I don't trust him, Ravian corrected. There's a difference. Cassius is brilliant with money, utterly ruthless in negotiation, and ambitious enough to be dangerous. But he's also been loyal for 6 centuries. That counts for something. Willa set down her fork, her expression thoughtful. He's the one who wants you to sell bottles from the collection. He sees assets where I see history. It's a fundamental difference in philosophy. Ravian reached across the table, took her hand. He also thinks you're a distraction, a liability. Am I? Yes. He turned her hand over, pressed a kiss to her palm. You're also the best thing to happen to me in 200 years, so he can lodge his complaints with someone who cares. She laughed, bright and real, and Ravian felt that sound settle into his bones like warmth. They moved to the library after dinner, a massive room lined with books Ravian had collected across centuries, and Willa curled into one of the leather chairs with a wine reference book, while Ravian built a fire that neither of them needed, but both appreciated anyway. The firelight painted her skin gold, and he couldn't resist pulling her out of the chair and into his arms, dancing to music only he could hear. There's no music, Willa protested, but she followed his lead anyway, her body fitting against his like she'd been made for exactly this. I'm 600 years old. I have symphonies memorized. He spun her carefully, pleased when she laughed. Just follow me. I've been following you since I got here, she said, and the honesty in it stole his breath. They swayed together in the firelight, and Ravian let himself have her, this moment of perfect peace before whatever storm was coming inevitably arrived. It arrived 2 nights later. Ravian was in the cellar with Willa, helping her photograph labels for her database, when Lysander appeared at the entrance with another vampire at his side, tall, white-haired, ice-pale, and wearing a suit that cost more than most mortals made in a year. Cassius Kaltherion smiled with too many teeth and said, "So this is where you've been hiding, cousin." Ravian straightened, putting himself between Cassius and Willa, with a movement too fast to be human. "Cassius, I wasn't expecting you until next week's council session. I moved up my schedule, business opportunities in the city." Cassius's gaze slid past Ravian to Willa, assessing and cold. "This must be the famous sommelier. Miss Ashford, I presume." Willa stepped around Ravian, extended her hand with the same confidence she'd shown when meeting Ravian himself. "Mr. Kaltherion, your cousin's collection is extraordinary." Cassius took her hand, brought it to his lips in a gesture that made Ravian's vision tint red. "Please, call me Cassius. And yes, my cousin does love his wine, among other things." He released her hand, turned his attention to Ravian. "Might I have a word, my lord? In private? Anything you need to say can be said here." "Can it?" Cassius raised an eyebrow. "Very well. The council has concerns about your recent behavior, your priorities, the amount of time and attention you've devoted to a mortal consultant while court business languishes." "Court business is managed perfectly well by my chancellors and ministers," Ravian said coldly, "as it has been for decades." "Managed, yes, but without your direct oversight, without your presence at crucial negotiations." Cassius began to pace, his movements predatory. "You've always been so careful, cousin, so controlled. 400 years of perfect rule, never showing weakness, never allowing personal sentiment to compromise your judgment. And now, suddenly, you're spending every evening locked in a cellar with a human woman, rearranging your schedule, missing council sessions." "I've missed 2 sessions, 2 more than you've missed in the past century combined." Cassius stopped pacing, faced Ravian directly. "They're saying you've gone soft, that the great Ravian Kaltherion has finally found something he cares about more than the throne." "Who's saying this? Does it matter?" Cassius spread his hands. "The perception exists, and in our world, perception is everything. A king who appears weak invites challenge. A king who appears distracted invites betrayal." Willa spoke up, her voice sharp. "So your solution is what? He should stop having any kind of personal life? Lock himself away from anything resembling human connection just to appear strong?" Cassius looked at her like she was a particularly interesting insect. "You misunderstand our world, Miss Ashford. In vampire politics, human connection is human weakness. The moment my cousin started caring about you, he painted a target on both your backs." "Then they'll miss," Willa shot back, "because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is he." "Brave words," Cassius smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "I wonder if you'll still feel that way when other courts start circling, looking for leverage. When the traditionalists in our own court decide you're a threat to stability that needs eliminating." Ravian moved faster than mortal eyes could follow, had Cassius against the wine racks with a hand around his throat before the words finished echoing. "Threaten her again," he said very softly, "and cousin or not, I will end you." Cassius didn't struggle, just met Ravian's eyes with something like satisfaction. There it is, the sentiment, the compromised judgment. He spoke despite the hand crushing his windpipe. "You just threatened to kill your own blood over a mortal you've known for 5 weeks. And you wonder why the court is concerned?" Ravian released him, stepped back, his control reasserting itself through sheer force of will. "Willa is under my protection. Anyone who moves against her moves against me. Make sure the court understands that." "Oh, they'll understand." Cassius straightened his collar, utterly unruffled. "They'll understand perfectly that their king has found his weakness, his exploitable, fragile, mortal weakness." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "I'm not your enemy, cousin. I'm trying to help you see clearly before this infatuation costs you everything you've built. Think about it." He left, and the cellar fell silent, except for Willa's too fast breathing. "I'm sorry," Ravian said quietly. "I shouldn't have brought you into this." "Stop." Willa crossed to him, took his face in both hands. "Stop apologizing for caring about me. Stop treating me like I'm something to be ashamed of." "I'm not ashamed." "Then prove it." Her eyes blazed. "Stand up in front of your court and tell them I matter. Tell them you're not going to pretend otherwise just because it makes them uncomfortable. Show them that caring about someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you worth following." "Willa, you don't understand the danger." "I understand that I love you," she said, and the words hit him like lightning. "I understand that I've been in love with you since you opened that champagne and told me wine was mortal magic. I understand that I would rather face danger with you than safety anywhere else. So stop trying to protect me from your life and let me into it, all the way in." Ravian stared at her, this impossible, brave, foolish woman who just said she loved him and felt 600 years of careful control shatter like crystal. "I love you too," he said, and kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. They stumbled to the tasting table, mouths fused together, and Ravian lifted her onto the ancient wood, stepped between her knees, let himself have this, have her, consequences be damned. Willa's hands were in his hair, her legs wrapped around his waist, and she tasted like wine and certainty and home. "Your chambers," she gasped against his mouth. "Take me to your chambers." He did, carrying her through the cellar's secret passages to the private wing where he'd kept himself separate from the court for centuries. When they finally tumbled into his bed together, Ravian let himself be vulnerable in ways he'd forgotten were possible, let himself be known and seen and loved by this mortal woman who'd turned his careful existence into glorious chaos. Afterward, Willa lay curled against his chest, one hand resting over his silent heart, and said, "Show me the glass." Ravian went still. "What?" "The wine glass. The one you locked away." She propped herself up on one elbow, looked down at him with those knowing eyes. "I want to see where you keep it, what it means to you." He almost refused. The vault was his most private space, the place where he kept the things too precious or too painful to share. But she'd just given him everything, trusted him with her body and her heart and her safety, and denying her this felt like cowardice. So he rose, pulled on enough clothing to be decent, and led her to the spelled vault built into his chamber wall. The wards recognized him, iron doors swinging open to reveal the small space within. The wine glass sat on a velvet cushion, spotlit from above, its crimson lipstick mark perfect and preserved. Willa stepped closer, her breath catching. "You built a shrine." "I built a reliquary," Ravian corrected softly. "For the first thing in 200 years I wanted to keep because it belonged to someone who mattered." She turned to face him, tears shining in her eyes. "I left my mark on you that night, didn't I? Not just on the glass?" "Yes." He drew her close, pressed his lips to her forehead. "You marked me, Willa Ashford, claimed me before I even realized I was yours to claim." "Good," she whispered, "because you're not getting rid of me. Court politics, vampire drama, danger, all of it, I don't care. I'm staying." "Even if it costs you everything?" "Even then," she kissed him, soft and sure. "Now take me back to bed and tell me stories about every bottle in your collection until I fall asleep." He did, And as Willa drifted off in his arms, Ravian stared at the vault where her glass sat preserved and thought about what Cassius had said, about weakness and exploitation and targets painted on backs. His cousin wasn't wrong that sentiment could be weaponized, but he was wrong that it made Ravian weak. Because for the first time in 400 years of rule, Ravian had something worth protecting beyond power and territory and pride. He had someone who made immortality feel less like a curse and more like opportunity. And if the court wanted to challenge him over that, wanted to test whether love made him vulnerable, they would learn very quickly that there was nothing more dangerous than a vampire king with something precious to defend. Let them come. He would burn the world down before he let anyone take her from him. The challenge came at the next council session, 3 nights later. Ravian sat the scarlet throne in the court's underground chamber, a massive vaulted space carved from living stone and decorated with tapestries that had witnessed centuries of vampire politics. 30 council members filled the carved stone benches, representatives of the court's oldest families and most powerful factions, all of them pale and regal and watching him with varying degrees of concern. Cassius stood at the chamber's center, playing the role of loyal cousin, raising difficult questions, and Ravian wanted to rip his throat out. "My lord," Cassius said with perfect deference, "the council requests clarity regarding your relationship with the mortal consultant, Willa Ashford." "Then I'll provide it." Ravian leaned forward on the throne, his voice carrying through the chamber with absolute authority. "Miss Ashford is completing the cellar appraisal I commissioned. Beyond that, she is under my personal protection as someone I value. Are there other questions?" Murmurs rippled through the council. Cassius pressed forward. "The court appreciates your protection of those who serve you, my lord. However, there are concerns that your personal investment in this particular mortal has become excessive, that it represents a security risk and a distraction from your duties." "My duties are managed flawlessly," Ravian said coldly. "Unless you're suggesting otherwise, Cassius." "Not at all, my lord. You have excellent ministers and chancellors." Cassius spread his hands. "But leadership requires more than delegation. It requires presence, visibility, the perception of total commitment to the court's interests. When the king spends more time with a mortal woman than with his own council, it raises questions about priorities. My priorities are perfectly clear." Ravian stood, descended from the dais with predatory grace. "I have ruled this court for 4 centuries. I have expanded our territory, secured our position among the vampire nations, and maintained stability through wars and inquisitions and internal challenges. My record speaks for itself." "It does indeed, my lord." This from Soren, one of the older council members, his white hair braided in the style of the previous century. "Which is why your recent behavior is so concerning. We've never seen you form an attachment like this. We don't know what it means." "It means," Ravian said carefully, "that I have found someone whose company I value, someone who reminds me that existence is more than politics and power. That is not weakness, Soren. That is wisdom. With respect, my lord, it is vulnerability." Cassius again, relentless. "In our world, attachment is leverage. Every court within traveling distance now knows you care about this woman. They know she is mortal, fragile, and accessible in ways you are not. They will use her against you." "Then they will fail," Ravian said flatly, "because I am not so weak that caring about someone makes me exploitable. I am, in fact, considerably more dangerous now than I was 6 weeks ago, because I finally have something worth unleashing my full strength to protect." The chamber went very quiet. "Are you threatening other courts, my lord?" Cassius asked softly. "I'm stating a fact. Anyone who moves against Willa Ashford moves against me, personally, directly, with full knowledge that I will respond with overwhelming force." Ravian looked around the chamber, met the eyes of every council member. "I have been patient and measured and diplomatic for 400 years. I have played the games of vampire politics with appropriate restraint. But understand this, I will burn every alliance and break every treaty before I let harm come to her. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lord." Lysander spoke up from his position near the throne, his voice calm and steady. "If I may, the council's concerns seem less about Miss Ashford herself and more about the precedent being set. If the king can be moved to such passion by a mortal, What does that mean for our laws regarding human contact, for our traditional separation from the mortal world? Smart, Ravian thought. Lysander was giving him an opening, reframing the debate. Our laws regarding mortals remain unchanged, Ravian said. Feeding restrictions, consent requirements, exposure protocols, all still in force. What I do in my private life does not alter court policy. But it does alter court perception, Cassius pressed, if the king openly keeps a mortal lover. I have not said she is my lover. You've said she's someone you value enough to threaten war over. Forgive me, my lord, but the distinction seems semantic. Cassius moved closer, lowering his voice though everyone in the chamber could still hear him perfectly. Cousin, I'm trying to protect you. From yourself, if necessary. This woman has turned you into someone I don't recognize, someone ruled by emotion instead of reason. That is dangerous for you and for all of us. Ravian studied his cousin, saw the genuine concern beneath the political maneuvering, and felt something almost like pity. Cassius had lived 600 years without letting himself care about anything that couldn't be quantified in power or profit. He genuinely believed sentiment was weakness, because he'd never let himself feel it long enough to discover its strength. You're wrong, Ravian said quietly. Emotion doesn't make me weak, Cassius. It makes me whole. For the first time in centuries, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing. And yes, that comes with risk. Everything worth having does. But I would rather face that risk than return to the emptiness I didn't even realize I was carrying. He turned back to the full council, raised his voice. I will not apologize for caring about Willa Ashford. I will not hide what she means to me to spare your comfort. If that makes me appear weak in the eyes of other courts, they are welcome to test that weakness and discover their mistake. This council session is concluded. The dismissal was absolute. Council members rose, filing out in whispers and sidelong glances, and Ravian returned to the throne, settling into it with the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. Lysander approached once the chamber had emptied. That was bold, my lord. It was necessary. Yes. Lysander smiled slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're right. About emotion as strength. I've served you 400 years, and I've never seen you more clear-headed than you are now. Because I have something to lose. Because you have something to fight for, Lysander corrected gently. There is a difference. I'll increase security around Miss Ashford's quarters, discreetly. Thank you. Ravian rubbed his eyes, a vestige of mortal exhaustion he'd never quite lost. Is Cassius right? Am I being selfish, putting the court at risk for personal happiness? You're being human, my lord, in the best possible way. Lysander bowed, precise as always. I'll leave you to your evening. I believe Miss Ashford is waiting in the library. She was, curled in the same leather chair as before, but her face when Ravian entered told him she'd been worrying. She stood the moment she saw him, searching his expression. How bad was it? Manageable. He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, breathed in her scent like it could ground him. I told them you matter, that anyone who threatens you threatens me. You shouldn't have done that, Willa said, but she held him tighter. Too late. It's done. He kissed the top of her head. No more hiding, no more pretending. You're mine, publicly and officially, and if the court doesn't like it, they can adjust. She pulled back enough to see his face. And if they don't adjust? If Cassius was right about other courts seeing me as leverage, then I'll remind them why I've held this throne for 4 centuries, why every challenge against me has ended with my challengers dead or exiled. His smile was all teeth. I am not weak, Willa. I'm just finally done pretending I don't feel. She kissed him, hard and claiming, and whispered against his lips, I love you. Every terrifying, overprotective, dramatic part of you. Good, he murmured back, because you're stuck with me now, for as long as you'll have me. Forever, then. She said it lightly, but he heard the question beneath it. Ravian went very still. Willa. I'm not asking you to turn me, she said quickly. I know that's complicated, that there are laws and politics and 1,000 reasons it might be impossible, but I need you to know that when I say forever, I mean it. However long my mortal life lasts, it's yours. And when your mortal life ends? The question hurt to ask. When I have to watch you age and fade and leave me? Then you'll have had me while I was here. She touched his face, her fingers warm against his cold skin. Isn't that better than never having me at all? No, he said honestly. It's going to destroy me, Willa. Losing you. I don't know how I'll survive it. The way you've survived everything else? She kissed him again, softer. With strength and stubbornness and too much wine. And maybe if the laws and politics align someday, we'll figure out another option. But right now, let's just have this. Us. Whatever time we get. He wanted to argue, to demand guarantees and solutions, to find some way to keep her with him permanently. But she was right that those were conversations for later, complications for another day. Right now, she was here, alive and warm and his, and that would have to be enough. 2 weeks passed in careful tension. Ravian attended every council session, managed court business with his usual efficiency, and made sure everyone saw him functioning perfectly well while openly acknowledging Willa's importance. She finished the cellar appraisal, presenting him with a complete catalog and valuation that took his breath away with its thoroughness. And when he asked if she'd stay beyond the original contract, she'd smiled and said yes before he finished the question. They fell into a rhythm. Evenings in the cellar or library, nights in his chambers, mornings where he held her while she slept and tried not to think about mortality. Lysander's enhanced security kept watch without being intrusive, and for a brief window, Ravian let himself believe they might actually have peace. The window shattered on a Thursday night when Lysander burst into Ravian's study without knocking, his usual composure cracked. "My lord, we have a situation." Ravian looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing. "What kind of situation?" "Eastern European delegation, unannounced. They're at the mansion gates now, demanding an audience." Lysander's expression was grim. "It's Constantine Draven and his inner circle." Every instinct Ravian possessed went on high alert. Constantine Draven ruled the vampire territories from Prague to Moscow with an iron fist and a reputation for ruthless elimination of perceived threats. He was older than Ravian by 2 centuries, more powerful by any objective measure, and utterly without mercy. "What does he want?" "He won't say." "But my lord, Willa is in the cellar, alone." Ravian was moving before Lysander finished speaking, down the halls and stairs at vampire speed, his mind racing through possibilities and threats. Constantine wouldn't have come personally unless he intended to make a point, and the fact that he'd arrived unannounced meant he wanted the element of surprise. He found Willa in the Bordeaux section, oblivious and safe, photographing labels for her expanded database. She looked up when he entered, smiled, then frowned at his expression. "What's wrong?" "We have visitors, potentially dangerous ones." Ravian pulled her away from the racks toward the cellar's private exit. "I need you to go to your quarters and stay there until I come for you." "Ravian, you're scaring me." "Good, you should be scared." He stopped at the exit door, framed her face in his hands. "Constantine Draven is here. He rules half of Eastern Europe, and he's dangerous in ways that make Cassius look like a minor nuisance. I don't know what he wants, but I need you safe while I find out." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "This is about me, isn't it? About what you said in council. About me being leverage. I don't know yet, but I'm not taking chances." He kissed her, brief and desperate. "Please, Willa, trust me." She did, slipping through the door toward the residential wing, and Ravian waited until he heard her footsteps fade before returning to the main mansion. Constantine Draven waited in the receiving hall, flanked by 4 other vampires, all of them ancient and powerful and radiating menace. Constantine himself was tall even by vampire standards, his white hair falling past his shoulders, his pale face sharp and aristocratic. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most cars, and he looked at Ravian's mansion like he was cataloging its weaknesses. Ravian Kaltherion. Constantine's voice carried the accent of a dozen different centuries. "You've been avoiding my calls." "I've been busy." Ravian descended the stairs with calculated calm, every inch the king on his own territory. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unannounced visit, Constantine?" "Curiosity." Constantine's smile was a predator's expression. "I've been hearing fascinating rumors about the great Ravian Kaltherion and his mortal pet. I wanted to see for myself if they were true." "What rumors specifically?" that you've fallen in love with a human sommelier, that you threatened to burn alliances and break treaties to protect her, that you've gone soft after 4 centuries of perfect control. Constantine circled Ravian slowly, assessing. I wanted to know if the king who once held off 3 courts simultaneously had really been undone by a mortal woman. Undone implies destruction, Ravian said coldly. I assure you, I'm functioning perfectly well. Are you? Constantine stopped circling, faced him directly. Because from where I stand, you look compromised, vulnerable, weak. Then test it. Ravian let his power rise to the surface, the ancient strength that had won him the throne in the first place. Challenge me directly, Constantine, and discover exactly how weak I am. The hall went silent, both kings facing each other while their respective retinues watched with predatory interest. Then Constantine laughed, sharp and genuine. There it is, the strength I remember. He clapped Ravian on the shoulder, a gesture both familiar and threatening. I'm not here to challenge you, old friend. I'm here to offer advice. I don't recall asking for it. You never did, but you need it anyway. Constantine moved toward the library, clearly expecting Ravian to follow. Send your people away. This conversation is private. Ravian nodded to Lysander, who withdrew with clear reluctance, taking Constantine's retinue with him. Once they were alone, Constantine settled into one of the library chairs with the ease of someone who owned every room he entered. You've made yourself vulnerable, Constantine said without preamble. Every court knows about the woman. Every court is now calculating how to use her against you. Let them try. They will, and you'll defend her, which will drain your resources and attention. You'll make enemies protecting her. You'll compromise your position over a mortal who will be dead in 60 years regardless. Constantine leaned forward. I've lived 900 years, Ravian. I've seen kings fall because they let themselves care about the wrong things. Don't be one of them. Is that advice or a threat? It's reality. Constantine's expression was almost gentle. I like you. I respect what you've built here. So I'm telling you now, end it. Send the woman away with generous compensation and an ironclad memory modification. Return to the king you were before she arrived. No. You say that now while she's novel and exciting. But Ravian, you have centuries ahead of you. She has decades. The math doesn't work. Constantine stood, moved to the window overlooking the gardens. I've walked this path, 3 times actually, across my long existence, 3 mortals I thought I couldn't live without. Do you know where they are now? Dead. Dust, Constantine corrected harshly, not even bones remaining, just dust and fading memories and the certainty that I was a fool for thinking they were worth the pain of losing them. He turned back to Ravian. Save yourself that pain. End it now, while you still can. Ravian studied the older vampire, saw genuine concern beneath the harsh words, and understood that Constantine actually thought he was being helpful. That he'd come all this way to spare Ravian's suffering by encouraging him to choose emptiness over love. I appreciate your concern, Ravian said carefully, but I'm not ending it. Then you're a fool. Probably. Ravian moved to stand beside Constantine at the window. But I'd rather be a fool who loved and lost than a wise man who never let himself feel anything at all. I've had 400 years of perfect control, Constantine. I've been the untouchable king, the strategic mind, the vampire who never let sentiment interfere with rule. And I was empty. Didn't even realize how empty until Willa showed me what it felt like to actually live. And when she dies? Constantine challenged. When you're alone again, with nothing but the memory of her? Then I'll still have had her, Ravian said quietly. I'll have these months, these memories, the knowledge that for a brief window of my existence, I was loved by someone extraordinary. That's worth the pain, Constantine, at least to me. Constantine was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, ancient and tired. You really believe that? I do. Then you're braver than I was. He clapped Ravian on the shoulder again, more gently this time. I hope you're right. I hope it's worth it. But I've left standing orders with my court. If anything happens to you because of this mortal attachment, if another court exploits her to weaken you, my people are authorized to respond with force. Consider it a wedding gift. We're not married. Yet, Constantine headed for the door, paused at the threshold. Protect her, Ravian, because the courts won't be as gentle as I've been. They'll see her as a target, and they'll move fast. I know. Then be ready. Constantine left with his retinue, disappearing into the night, and Ravian stood alone in the library processing the conversation. It hadn't been the threat he'd feared, but it had been a warning from someone who'd made the opposite choice, who'd closed himself off from feeling to avoid pain. Ravian didn't want to become that, didn't want 900 years of isolation ahead of him just because love came with expiration dates. He found Willa in her quarters, pacing anxiously. She flew into his arms the moment he entered. What happened? Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm fine. Ravian held her tight, breathed her in. Constantine came to warn me, in his own way, to tell me I'm making myself vulnerable by caring about you. He's not wrong. He's also not right. Ravian pulled back enough to see her face. I don't care about the risk, Willa. I care about you. That's not changing. She kissed him fiercely, and he tasted tears, salt mixing with her sweetness. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm mortal and fragile and a liability. Don't. He caught her face, made her look at him. Don't apologize for being human. That's what I love about you. Your mortality, your warmth, the way you make me feel alive just by existing near me. You're not a liability, Willa. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even if I get you killed, I've survived 400 years of vampire politics. I think I can handle a few more challenges. He smiled, tried to lighten the mood. Besides, I have excellent security and a very motivated interest in staying alive. She laughed wetly, pressed her forehead to his chest. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, he whispered into her hair. Be terrified with me. The months that followed were a delicate dance of court politics and stolen moments. Ravian made it clear through actions and presence that Willa was a permanent fixture in his life, not a passing fancy, and watched the court slowly adjust to the reality. Some council members warmed to her, appreciating her intelligence and the obvious happiness she brought their king. Others remained coldly disapproving, muttering about tradition and proper separation from mortals. Cassius fell into the latter category, though he stopped making overt challenges after Constantine's visit. Instead, he watched and waited, and Ravian watched him back, aware that his cousin's acceptance was purely strategic, not genuine. Willa herself navigated the court with surprising grace, refusing to be intimidated by ancient vampires or complicated politics. She finished her official appraisal work, but stayed on as Ravian's personal wine curator, managing the collection and establishing proper rotation and tasting schedules. The cellar became their shared space, the place where they could be just Ravian and Willa instead of vampire king and mortal consultant. 6 months after that first evening, Ravian took her back to the champagne vault where everything had started. Why here? Willa asked as he unlocked the door. Because I want to show you something. He led her to the tasting table, now set with 2 fresh crystal glasses and a bottle he'd been saving. Recognize this? She looked at the label, gasped. That's the 1928, the one we opened the first time. The last bottle from that vintage in my collection. He worked the cork free with practiced care. I've been saving it. For what? For this. He poured carefully, handed her a glass, kept one for himself. Willa Ashford, you walked into my life 6 months ago, left your mark on a wine glass, and turned my entire existence inside out. You made me feel things I'd forgotten were possible. You made me want things beyond power and territory and endless time. You made me want a future that includes someone else's happiness, not just my own. He set down his glass, took both her hands in his. I can't offer you a normal life. I can't promise you safety or simplicity or anything resembling ordinary. But I can promise you every resource I have, every bit of protection I can provide, and every moment of my existence devoted to making you happy. He went to one knee, produced a ring box from his pocket, watched her eyes go wide. I can promise you forever, however long your forever lasts. Marry me, Willa. Be my queen. Let me spend your lifetime proving that sentiment isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes immortality worth living. Willa was crying, nodding before he finished speaking. Yes, yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a ruby surrounded by diamonds that had once belonged to his mother 6 centuries ago, and stood to kiss her while she laughed and cried against his mouth. The champagne forgotten, they held each other in the vault where it had all begun, and Ravian felt something settle in his chest, a certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats emerged from jealous courts or disapproving factions, they would face them together. The wedding was a court affair, held in the mansion's grand ballroom with every vampire family of consequence in attendance. Willa wore white lace and looked radiant, her mortality a sharp, bright flame among all the pale, immortal faces, and Ravian wore his finest suit and couldn't stop looking at her like she was the only person in the room. Lysander officiated, ancient words binding them in both human and vampire tradition, and when Ravian kissed his bride, the court erupted in applause that sounded almost genuine. Almost, because Cassius stood in the back, not applauding, his expression calculating, and Ravian knew with cold certainty that his cousin hadn't abandoned his objections. He'd just decided to wait for a better opportunity. The thought should have worried him. Instead, with Willa's hand in his and her joy radiating like sunlight, Ravian found he couldn't care about distant threats. Let them come. He had something worth fighting for now. The first year of their marriage was the happiest of Ravian's 6th-century existence. Willa moved fully into his private chambers, turned them into something that felt like home instead of just shelter. She filled the rooms with books and flowers and her laughter, and Ravian discovered that he'd been living in a mausoleum without realizing it, until she brought it back to life. The court adjusted, slowly and grudgingly. Willa's intelligence and genuine interest in vampire history won over some of the older families, while her refusal to be intimidated earned respect from the warriors and strategists. She became a fixture at council sessions, sitting beside Ravian's throne and occasionally offering insights that proved valuable enough to silence the critics who claimed mortals had no place in vampire politics. But Cassius remained a problem. He never challenged openly, never made moves that could be definitively labeled as treason, but he cultivated relationships with the court's traditionalist faction, whispered about weakness and mortality, positioned himself as the alternative to Ravian's sentiment-compromised rule. Lysander warned about it during their regular security briefings. "He's building a coalition, my lord. Nothing concrete yet, but the pieces are aligning. If an opportunity presents itself, Cassius will move against you." "Let him," Ravian said, but he increased security around Willa anyway, made sure she was never unguarded. The opportunity came 2 years into the marriage, on a winter night when Ravian was called away on urgent court business in the Northern Territories, a border dispute that required the king's personal attention. He didn't want to leave Willa, but the situation was deteriorating fast and his presence was the only thing preventing open conflict. "I'll be gone 3 days," he told her, holding her close in their chambers. "Lysander will stay here with you. Double security on all entrances." "I'll be fine," Willa assured him, though her fingers clutched his shirt. "Go handle your border crisis. I'll catalog the new Portuguese acquisitions and bore myself to sleep with vintage charts." He kissed her thoroughly, reluctantly released her, and left before he could change his mind. The border crisis resolved faster than expected, Ravian's reputation and authority enough to broker peace without actual violence. He was back on the road home within 40 hours, pushing his driver to excessive speed because something felt wrong, some instinct screaming that he needed to get back to Willa now. He arrived at the mansion to chaos. Lysander met him at the entrance, his usual composure shattered, blood on his sleeve. "My lord, I'm sorry. I tried to stop them, but—" "Where is she?" Ravian grabbed his chancellor by the shoulders. "Where is Willa?" "The cellar. Cassius has her in the cellar. He sealed it with blood wards. I can't break through." Ravian was running before Lysander finished, down through the mansion to the cellar entrance where he found exactly what his chancellor had described. The door sealed with wards written in vampire blood, ancient magic designed to keep out anyone not of Cassius's direct bloodline. But Ravian was of Cassius's bloodline, cousins turned within a decade of each other, and blood wards recognized family. He shattered the seals with a thought and raw power, blew the door off its hinges, and descended into his beloved cellar ready to kill. He found them in the central chamber, Cassius standing over Willa where she sat bound to a chair, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. Half a dozen other vampires stood around them, members of the traditionalist faction, all armed with wooden stakes and wearing expressions of righteous certainty. Ravian, Cassius didn't look surprised by his cousin's arrival. "You're early. Step away from my wife." Ravian's voice came out cold enough to frost the air. "Now. Or what? You'll kill me? Your own blood? Your cousin for a mortal?" Cassius shook his head sadly. "That's exactly what I'm trying to prevent. Your complete subordination to human sentiment, your transformation from king to lovesick fool." I said, "Step away from her." "She's made you weak, cousin. Can't you see it?" Cassius began to pace, playing to his audience as much as to Ravian. 2 years ago, you would have handled that border crisis with overwhelming force. Instead, you negotiated, compromised, showed mercy, all because this woman has taught you to value life over strength. Mercy isn't weakness. In our world, it is. Cassius stopped behind Willa's chair, rested a hand on her shoulder, and Ravian saw red. "I'm doing this for you, Ravian. For the court. For the king you used to be before she infected you with her mortality. If you hurt her, you'll what? Destroy the court in revenge? Burn everything you've built over 4 centuries? Cassius leaned down, spoke into Willa's ear, though his words carried to everyone present. "That's the problem, you see. He loves you more than he loves his crown, more than he loves his people, more than he loves himself. That kind of love is poison to a king." "You're wrong," Willa said clearly. "He's a better king because he loves me. More patient, more understanding, more willing to consider mercy. The court is stronger for it, not weaker." "The court is ready to collapse from his softness," Cassius shot back. "Look around, mortal. Half the council is here, ready to depose a king who's forgotten what it means to rule." Ravian did look around, counted the vampires present, recognized them all. Old families, traditionalist views, all of them convinced that sentiment was death to proper authority. Not a majority of the court, but enough to cause serious damage if this turned violent. "This is a coup," he said flatly. "This is an intervention," Cassius corrected. "Give her up, cousin. Send her away, return to the king you were, and we'll forget this ever happened. You can keep your throne, your authority, your reputation. All you have to lose is one mortal woman who is always going to die eventually anyway." "No, then you'll lose everything." Cassius drew a knife, pressed it to Willa's throat, and Ravian felt his entire world narrow to that blade against her skin. "Choose, Ravian. The woman or the crown. Your love or your legacy. What matters more?" Ravian met Willa's eyes across the cellar, saw her fear and her trust in equal measure, and made his choice. "Her," he said simply. "She matters more. Always." He moved faster than the other vampires could track, crossed the space between them in a blur of ancient speed, ripped Cassius away from Willa with enough force to shatter bones. His cousin hit the wine racks and collapsed in a shower of broken glass and spilled vintages. "Anyone else want to threaten my wife?" Ravian stood over Willa's chair, his fangs fully descended, his power a visible aura. "Anyone else want to test whether love has made me weak?" The traditionalists backed away, suddenly uncertain. Ravian had been holding back for centuries, playing the civilized king, the diplomatic ruler. Now they saw what he'd been before the throne, before the politics, when he'd been a young vampire fighting for territory with nothing but strength and will. He was terrifying. "The crown or the woman?" Cassius croaked from his position on the floor. "You chose the woman. You just proved my point." "No." Ravian cut through Willa's bonds with a claw, helped her to her feet, kept her close. "I chose both. Because I'm not weak enough to believe I have to sacrifice love to keep power. I'm not scared enough to think caring about someone makes me vulnerable." He looked at each vampire in turn. "I am your king. I have been for 400 years. I will be for 400 more. And I will do it while loving my wife, protecting my wife, and building a future that includes her. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to challenge me directly." Silence. No one moved. "That's what I thought." Ravian turned to Cassius, felt something like grief mix with his rage. "You're exiled. You have until dawn to leave my territory. If you're still here when the sun rises, I'll execute you myself." "Ravian." "Get out." Cassius pulled himself upright, glanced at his co-conspirators, seemed to realize the coup had failed before it started. "You're making a mistake, cousin." "It's mine to make." Cassius left, limping and broken, and the other traditionalists followed, casting nervous glances back at their king. Lysander appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and immediately began directing cleanup. Ravian gathered Willa into his arms and just held her, feeling her heartbeat against his silent chest, her warmth chasing away the cold fury. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen this coming, should have protected you better." "Stop." She pulled back, cupped his face in her hands. "You saved me. You chose me. You gave up your cousin, risked your throne, all for me." "I'd give up everything for you," he said honestly. "The throne, the court, all of it. You're what matters, Willa. You're the only thing that's ever really mattered." She kissed him, and he tasted salt, her tears or his, he wasn't sure. Around them, the cellar dripped spilled wine and broken glass, centuries of careful collection destroyed in the space of minutes, and Ravian couldn't bring himself to care. Wine could be replaced. Willa couldn't. The court convened the next evening to address Cassius's attempted coup. Ravian sat the scarlet throne with Willa beside him in her own chair, an unprecedented arrangement that made several council members shift uncomfortably. He didn't care. "Cassius Kaltherion is exiled," he announced formally, "along with any vampire who participated in yesterday's conspiracy. They have forfeited their positions, their properties, and their welcome in this court. Does anyone wish to contest this ruling?" No one did. Good. Ravian leaned forward, let his gaze sweep the assembled council. "Let me be absolutely clear about something. I love my wife. I will continue to love my wife. That is not changing, negotiable, or open for debate. If that makes any of you uncomfortable, you're welcome to leave. Otherwise, adjust." Murmurs, shifting, a few vampires actually standing to go. Ravian watched them leave without comment. When the chamber settled again, Soren spoke up. "My lord, with respect, the exiled faction represented nearly a quarter of the court's military strength. We're weakened by their loss." "We're stronger," Ravian corrected. "We've cut out the vampires who valued tradition over loyalty, who would turn on their king over his choice of wife. What remains is a court I can actually trust." He reached over, took Willa's hand. "And a court that understands sentiment isn't weakness. It's the only thing worth fighting for." Lysander stepped forward. "The crown recognizes Willa Kaltherion as queen consort, with all rights and protections that title entails. Any action against her is action against the throne itself." Ravian met his chancellor's eyes, saw approval there, and felt something settle. The court would adjust. The ones who couldn't would leave. What remained would be stronger for it. Years passed. 5, then 10, then 15. Willa aged gracefully, silver threading through her dark hair, laugh lines deepening around her eyes, and Ravian loved every change, every mark of time passing. They were years of peace and happiness, of nights in the cellar cataloging new acquisitions, of court business managed together, of stolen moments and steady love. The question of her mortality hung between them, unspoken but present. Ravian could turn her, make her vampire, give them actual forever. But it would cost her mortality, the very thing he loved about her, and neither of them could quite bring themselves to suggest it. Until Willa's 40th birthday, when she sat across from him at dinner and said, "We need to talk about the future." Ravian set down his wine glass. "All right. I'm 40. You're 652. We've had 15 years together, and they've been the best of my life." She reached across the table, took his hand. "But Ravian, I'm starting to age faster. I can feel it, and I need to know what you want. Do you want me to stay mortal, grow old, give you whatever years I have left? Or do you want to turn me? What do you want?" "I want forever with you," she said simply. "Real forever, not just whatever decades I have remaining. I want centuries of nights in the cellar. I want to see how wine tastes in 100 years, 200. I want to be your queen, not just until I die, but until the world ends." Ravian stood, pulled her to her feet, held her close. "You're sure? Turning is irreversible, Willa. You'll lose the sunlight, your mortality, the human life you could have had. I lost that life the moment I left lipstick on a wine glass and you kept it like a religious relic, she said with a smile. I chose this, Ravian. I chose you. Let me keep choosing you. Forever. He turned her that night, in their chambers with Lysander as witness, the ancient ritual that would make her vampire. She died in his arms as the venom stopped her heart, and for 3 days she lay in death sleep while her body transformed, and Ravian sat vigil beside her, holding her cold hand and praying to gods he'd stopped believing in centuries ago. On the 3rd night, she woke with red eyes and fangs and her first breath of immortal life. Hi, she whispered, her voice rough and new. Hi, Ravian whispered back, and kissed her as she laughed and cried, and held him with her new strength. They had decades to adjust to her vampirism, to teaching her control and power and all the skills she'd need. Willa took to it naturally, her intelligence and determination serving her well, and within 5 years, she was a formidable queen in her own right, commanding respect from the court through competence rather than just her position as Ravian's wife. The cellar remained their sanctuary, the place where they went to remember what they'd been before titles and politics complicated everything. They opened legendary bottles on anniversaries, cataloged new acquisitions together, and kept adding to the collection that had brought them together. And the wine glass, the original glass with its faded lipstick mark, remained locked in its vault, a reminder of the moment everything changed. 50 years after Willa's turning, on their 65th wedding anniversary, Ravian brought her to the champagne vault where he'd proposed. The space had been rebuilt after Cassius's destruction, better and more secure, but the small tasting table remained the same. He set out 2 fresh crystal glasses and the last bottle of 1928 champagne from his collection, saved for exactly this moment. We opened this together once before, he said, working the cork free. The night you left your mark. The night you fell for me, Willa corrected with a smile. The night I started falling, he amended. I'd been falling since you walked in and demanded full access to the cellar. He poured carefully, the ancient champagne barely there, a ghost of itself, still somehow perfect. They raised their glasses in unison. To 65 years, Willa said. To forever, Ravian corrected, however long that lasts. They drank, and the wine was memory and time and everything they'd built together. When Willa set down her glass, Ravian saw the faint mark her lips left on the crystal, darker than it had been when she was mortal, but still undeniably hers. Are you going to keep this one too? She asked, catching his expression. No. He set down his own glass, pulled her close. I don't need to keep relics anymore. I have you. The actual you, not just traces and marks and memories. Good answer. She kissed him, and they stood together in the vault where it all began, surrounded by bottles aging toward perfection, and Ravian thought about how much had changed since that first evening. He'd been so careful then, so controlled, keeping everyone and everything at safe distance. He'd thought sentiment was weakness, that caring was vulnerability, that love was a luxury kings couldn't afford. Willa had taught him otherwise, had shown him that love wasn't weakness, it was the foundation of actual strength, that caring about someone gave you something worth defending with everything you had. That sentiment wasn't vulnerability, it was the only thing that made immortal existence meaningful. The glass with its lipstick mark had been his first acknowledgement of that truth, a physical proof that he'd wanted to keep something, someone, more than he'd wanted to maintain his careful distance. Now it sat in its vault, locked away but never forgotten, a symbol of the moment Ravian Kaltherion had chosen feeling over emptiness. And he'd never once regretted it. They left the champagne vault hand in hand, headed back toward their chambers through the cellar's familiar passages, and Ravian glanced back once at the vault where the original glass waited in its display case. Let it stay there, he thought, a reminder of who I was before Willa and who I became because of her. Above them, the modern city pulsed with mortal life, unaware of the vampire court hidden beneath their streets. But down here in the cellar, in the cool dark surrounded by aging wine and centuries of accumulated memory, Ravian and Willa built there forever. One bottle at a time, one kiss at a time, one perfect moment after another, stretching into an immortality that finally meant something because they faced it together. The wine glass with its faded lipstick mark remained locked away, a relic from their beginning. But their story, their love, their carefully cultivated forever that was still being written, still aging toward perfection, still becoming something beautiful and rare and worth preserving. Like the finest vintage ever created. Like mortal magic made eternal. Like love that had started with a mark on crystal and ended with forever.